In 1947, deep within a Soviet research facility, 5 political prisoners were offered an unusual deal. Participate in a classified experiment in exchange for their freedom. The task seemed simple. Stay awake for 30 days using an experimental stimulant gas. The goal was simple yet ambitious. Keep 5 men awake for 30 days using an experimental gas stimulant. The subjects would be closely monitored in a sealed environment while researchers observed the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation. What followed became one of the most disturbing chapters in scientific research history. This is the story of the Russian sleep experiment. But before we dive into the horrifying events that unfolded, we need to understand the political climate that made such an experiment possible. In the aftermath of World War II, both the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an arms race, not just for nuclear weapons, but for military advantages of all kinds. The Soviet Union, desperate to gain an advantage, reportedly initiated a series of psychological and physiological experiments. Among these, sleep deprivation research was seen as a potential goldmine for creating better soldiers who could stay awake and functional for days or even weeks without sleep. The idea was simple. A stimulant gas was developed to keep the subjects, in this case political prisoners, awake indefinitely. 5 political prisoners were selected for the trial. They were promised freedom in exchange for participating in the experiment. They were deemed expendable by the Soviet regime, yet each was in perfect physical and mental health. Their identities were never revealed in any surviving documentation, known only as subjects 1 through 5. They entered a sealed chamber roughly the size of a small apartment, equipped with books, beds, and enough food and water to last all 5 men for over a month. The chamber was also fitted with microphones in a large observation window, but no windows to the outside world. The experimental gas mixture was pumped in continuously through filtered vents. This gas contained a cocktail of stimulants and other psychoactive compounds designed to prevent sleep. The first 5 days progressed largely as expected. The subjects were monitored talking among themselves, reading, and writing. They discussed their lives, their families, and their hopes for freedom. Researchers noted increased anxiety and paranoia, but nothing outside the normal effects of sleep deprivation. The stimulant gas appeared to work flawlessly. By day 5, subjects began showing signs of severe emotional distress. They started to whisper into the microphones, believing they could win the sympathy of researchers. They revealed dark secrets from their past, confessing to crimes they had never been accused of. As days progressed, things took a disturbing turn. The subjects stopped talking to each other entirely, instead only whispering into the microphones. They began to cover the pages of their books with endless rambling writing. When staff reviewed the writing, they found countless desperate warnings about the true nature of human psychology and consciousness. One particularly haunting passage read, "The dreams are gone. What we see when we close our eyes is no longer darkness, but something else. Something that has always been there, watching." By day 6, the subjects' physical health also began to deteriorate. Their skin grew pale, their eyes bloodshot, and exhibited rapid heart rates and erratic breathing patterns. Yet none showed signs of exhaustion. It was as if sleep had become a foreign concept. Meanwhile, the researchers were monitoring every sound and movement. They noted that the subjects no longer seemed concerned about their freedom. Their focus had shifted to something else entirely, though it was unclear what. From day 10, the subjects began to show severe psychological deterioration. They stopped using the bathroom facilities, instead allowing their waste to accumulate in the chamber. They began to tear pages from books and plaster them to the windows, blocking the researchers' view. When asked about this behavior, they claimed they needed to block out the screaming from the mirrors. More disturbing was their newfound obsession with the continued flow of gas into the chamber. They took turns pressing their faces directly against the vents, inhaling deeply. When researchers tried to communicate with them about this behavior, they responded with an unsettling unity. "We must stay awake." The gas is all that keeps them awake. On the 16th day, the experiment spiraled out of control. Screams erupted from the sealed room, screams so blood-curdling that even the hardened researchers flinched. It started with one subject, then spread to all 5. They screamed for hours without stopping, until their voices were reduced to ragged whispers. When they could no longer scream, they began to tear at their own flesh with their fingernails. The researchers were horrified, but continued the experiment. The military officers overseeing the project insisted it continue, as they needed to understand what was happening to these men. By day 21 through 25, all communication ceased. The subjects remained motionless for long periods, then burst into fits of self-mutilation. One had disemboweled himself, yet seemed indifferent to the pain. Another had torn chunks of flesh from his own body and consumed them. Violence sets in against each other. They no longer ate. They no longer seemed human. The most chilling development was their reaction to the eventual failure of one of the gas flow pipes. When the distinctive hiss of gas decreased slightly, all 5 subjects began to scream in unified terror. They begged for the gas to be restored, claiming that they would get in without it. On day 26, the researchers made a devastating discovery. Subject 3 had died from what appeared to be self-inflicted wounds and organ failure. His death triggered a frenzy in the other subjects. They fought over his remains, attempting to consume them. The military officials ordered the chamber to be opened on day 29, one day before the planned end of the experiment. But the experiment ended in chaos, and what they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As security forces stormed the chamber, when the sealed door was opened, the remaining 4 subjects attacked the security team with superhuman strength. 2 soldiers were killed before the subjects could be restrained. The inside of the chamber was covered in blood and human remains. The subjects had torn muscle and flesh from their own bodies. But what truly terrified the medical team wasn't the physical damage, it was the subjects' behavior. When they were finally restrained and attempts were made to sedate them, they fought with impossible strength, begging not to be put to sleep, screaming that they feared what would happen if they fell asleep. One of the surviving subjects, strapped to a medical stretcher, spoke directly to the head researcher. His words were recorded in the official report. "We are what happens when you remove the human need for sleep. We are the madness that lurks within all of you, struggling to be free at every moment. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The subject then began to laugh, a sound described by witnesses as more animal than human. When asked why they had inflicted such horrible injuries upon themselves, all 4 subjects gave the same answer: "We must remain awake." The Russian sleep experiment remains one of the most controversial and disputed events in scientific history. While many claim it's merely an urban legend, certain details align with documented Soviet research into sleep deprivation and mind control. What we do know is that prolonged sleep deprivation can cause severe psychological damage. Modern ethical research has shown that even a few days without sleep can trigger hallucinations, paranoia, and a complete break from reality. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this story isn't whether it actually happened. It's what it suggests about human consciousness. What lies beneath our ordinary waking minds? And what aspects of ourselves do we suppress each night when we sleep? The Russian sleep experiment raises disturbing questions about the nature of human consciousness and the thin line between sanity and madness. What darkness lurks in the corners of our minds, held at bay only by the daily reset of sleep? As you prepare for bed tonight, perhaps you'll think about those 5 subjects and their desperate fight to stay awake. Perhaps you'll wonder as you drift off to sleep what exactly it is you're keeping at bay in those dark hours of unconsciousness. Because maybe, just maybe, sleep isn't just a biological necessity. Maybe it's a protection mechanism, shielding us from something far worse than simple exhaustion.